Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Welsh Athletics in conjunction with Sport Wales webinar. Tonight's webinar is for parents and clubs and their relationships and how to work together to create a positive athlete environment. This is following on from the last webinar that was done probably about a month or 6 weeks or so ago now, that was specifically for parents. So I'm just going to start by doing some introductions and say welcome. My name is Zoe Eaton. I'm the Performance Lifestyle Lead at Sport Wales. Also on the webinar, my colleague Sarah Carvel, a performance psychologist in Sport Wales, and Sarah will be monitoring the chat functions for any questions that come through. And also on the webinar is Zoe Brown, Coach Development Coordinator at Welsh Athletics, who will be managing any technical issues. So I'd like to start by saying welcome and thank you. Thank you for giving up a valuable evening in the middle of the summer holidays to join us on the webinar. I've been using the same storm, different boats analogy throughout the pandemic. So without knowing all of your current circumstances, situations and environments, thank you for giving up your evening to join us tonight. Just in terms of housekeeping, you may notice that we've automatically muted everyone's microphones. This is twofold to prevent any feedback coming through the system, and we'd like to also encourage you to use the questions function on the pop-up box on the right-hand side, or hopefully that's on the right-hand side of your screen, for any content-related questions. As I've mentioned, any technical issues, please use the chat function, and Zoe will be hopefully managing the chat function to provide any technical support. So why would we deliver a session around coaches and parents and engaging with each other? Well, like I said, the last session was more focused on parents and how they can support their children, their athletes. This session is more focused on how sports clubs and coaches can engage better with parents to promote positive relationships in and around the club environments to allow athletes to thrive. And what do we mean by thrive or thriving athletes? Well, there's a number of definitions out there. Research talks about thriving, supporting holistic functioning, and that holistic functioning is the combination of well-being and performance, or thriving being the joint experience of development and success. So you can see there's a number of definitions, but we can summarize thriving by saying it's allowing those within an environment to feel they are having a positive experience. So the objectives for tonight's webinar, there's three. We're going to explore athlete insights and research. We're also going to touch upon some coach and parent insights as well. We're going to chat through some tips for promoting a positive club environment and hopefully give you some tips to go away with. And we're also going to talk about how coaches and parents can engage. So again, why would we deliver a session around coaches and parents? Well, there's two groups of influencers in an athlete's life that we can provide support to. And good coaches, as the quote says, good coaches know that being aligned with athletes and parents towards a shared vision creates the kind of journey that shapes future successes on and off the field of play. And as the quote reads, a good coach can change a game, a great coach can change a life. And parents are often, not always, but often the taxi driver, the bank manager, the chef, the counsellor, the kit man, the agent, the motivator, the sleep police, the alarm, the concierge, the teacher, the voice of reason, and eventually are the ones that the athletes choose to share their successes with. And coaches and parents can spark and or spoil the development process. And depending on how we all engage, will determine how we influence an athlete's journey. So parents have a right and a responsibility to share this journey. And some word association that has been, how should we say, collected in the past is based on some underlying beliefs in sports that parents can be tricky. Coaches can often find parents tricky. Coaches that were asked to do some word association when we asked about parents, and instinctively thinking words such as hard work, problem child, high maintenance parents. Parents are tricky, they're challenging. You know, words like this came out regularly, and coaches are already affecting parent-coach relationships before they've even begun by instinctively thinking in this way. We know of stories where coaches openly say they are so pushy, I'm here to coach sport, not deal with parents. We even know of coaches who pretend to be on their phones to avoid having conversations with parents who might be nearby. And these are often knee-jerk responses from coaches, so we'd like to encourage more engagement and more positive engagement across the two groups. And again, why? Why are we delivering a session to a combined group of coaches and parents? Well, at Sport Wales, we are very much promoting thriving environments for all athletes at all levels. Insight from athletes talks about increases in stress levels. Most coach education is focused on coaching, leaving coaches to navigate this area on their own. Not all coaches have first-hand experience of what it feels like to be a parent in sports, and vice versa, not all parents have either been athletes or coaches. And we mentioned about research earlier, but research has also revealed that whilst each environment is unique, there's some shared features of thriving environments. And this bottom right-hand box shows some of these, and they include structure and monitoring. And for you, this might mean sharing training programs or season and competition plans with athletes and their parents. Athletes and parents that have access to such plans can then work with them and manage other aspects of their lives accordingly. A great example of this, mentioned on the left from Insight from Parents, is the holiday booking. There's a family holiday booked that clashes with a big competition. The family didn't know about this. Coach or club didn't communicate this early enough, or indeed at all. Warm and supportive relationships in your clubs. This might look like having a number of voluntary roles that parents can put their hands up for, such as a photographer on event day. Synergy and integrations among schools, family and community might ensure an athlete doesn't feel like they're on their own. So my club knows I have GCSE mock exams in December. My coach has tweaked training sessions to fit around my revision, or has told me to have some extra rest days, and my family know we've had these conversations. This all leads to a really positive culture, and culture doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's our obligation and responsibility to shape behaviours, and therefore any person that has a touch point within a culture holds influence over it. For parents and for coaches to not engage is abandoning a vital piece of the culture that we all have to manage and contribute to. And so some tips for you guys to take away, and hopefully if they're not already embedded in the club, you could potentially look to bring some of these tips into your environments. The first one, clubs should be setting the tone and the culture. Be really clear about what's valued and what's expected and lived and breathed at the club. At inductions, you can talk through what the athletes and parents can expect from you as coaches, and in turn, what you as a club expect from them. What are the core behaviours? What does development look like, or is it all about winning? Hopefully not. What are the boundaries around communication? So where, when, how to communicate? Do you have cooling off periods following selection announcements? Timekeeping, be a role model here. What's the role of parents, coaches on race day and at competition? As mentioned, a culture doesn't exist in a vacuum. So to ignore or exclude parents is abandoning this vital piece of culture here. And if you promote some of these behaviours by holding an induction at the start of every season, you've got something to go back to. You've got missions, values, behaviours that you can refer back to if you ever need to. Can you publish articles or send out infographics or resources? In a newsletter, articles can focus on topics like codes of conduct. Again, you can revisit some of the key messages that are talked through at the induction. What are the ground rules? What's good language, positive language look like? What does fair play mean? What to do if incidents occur? Again, all of these can be touched upon here and revisited regularly. Who are the role models? So who's modelling the behaviours that you want to see? Can you arrange for role models from your sport to talk to athletes, to parents, to coaches? Can you have an evening every now and then that invites role models to come in and speak and do Q&A? It can have a huge impact on people, especially young people, if they have role models telling their stories. Are there grand announcements at your training sessions or on race days or at events? Again, you can remind people to keep their emotions in check. For example, using the Let Kids Be Kids resources that are available through the Child Protection and Sport Unit. You can access these online as well. What is communication? What does positive communication look like within your club, within your environment? Can you have banners around the club? And I've got some examples I can share with you further on in this webinar. What kind of language would you encourage on the car journey home between parents and athletes or parents and children? on the way home from training sessions or on the way home from competitions. Can you have a fair play day? Is this something that you can arrange to reinforce positive messages in your environments? And do you have an awards night at the end of the year? Is there a good sport award? Is there an opportunity to have a most supportive parent award? These are really great ways to encourage this engagement. Again, just some infographics that you can share as a club. We'd absolutely encourage you to circulate positive messaging via infographics or through newsletters or on your website. These are both educational and informative. Parents sometimes don't know where to start, so it's often a great idea to signpost them or give them some resources to take a look at. Can you encourage top tips for your sports parents, for your parents of your clubs? Can you talk about what a good sports parent in your club environment looks like? These can absolutely be adapted to be suitable or more specific for your own clubs and your environments as coaches. And then some infographics to potentially have around the ground. The infographic on the left here talks about language to try and encourage people to avoid, signs to not, or language to not use when you're talking to your athlete as a parent, your child as a parent. And again, some signage that you can have around your environments. And yes, these are Americanized, but you can take the key messages and adapt them to your environments here. And the third one here has my favorite line in it, which is no college scholarships will be handed out today. And likewise, if you have set out your policies, etc., right at the beginning of the season in, for example, an induction, you have preferred behaviours that you can continually refer back to. And if people aren't living by these behaviours or displaying these behaviours, you have grounds then to ask people to leave venues if needs be, or you have grounds to just encourage appropriate behaviour where required. So what do we mean by an induction, and what could you have in an induction? So we've put together a potential agenda, and point one is fairly self-explanatory. It's always a good idea to introduce everyone that the young athlete will come into contact with, even if those people can't be present at the induction. You could show a photo and outline what their role is at the club. The second one is talk about your coaching philosophy as a coach. I heard a great talk from Alan Rapley recently, a former Olympic swimmer and now a coach educator, who was actually asked a Q&A question. He was asked what his coaching philosophy is, and he responded that he doesn't have a single coaching philosophy. He changes it regularly. Now, that's not to say that he also has 20 different coaching philosophies for 20 different athletes that he works with or coaches. It's more so that he adapts his style and his coaching methods to suit the individuals in front of him. Now, you as a coach might have your own coaching philosophy, but I would absolutely encourage you to share that at the induction with the athletes and the parents who come along to your inductions. What are the club's standards and expectations? Again, you can go through these. You can talk through a dealing with disagreement policy or having a cooling off period if there is a race or if there's a selection that takes place. Refer back to your culture, your policies, point people, signposts to people as to where they can find them should they want to look at them. What are your codes of conduct? What are your training standards? What are the different roles of parents and coaches at competition? What are the various official procedures to report incidents, etc.? And like I say, always follow that up with where those various standards, expectations, policies, etc. can be found at a later date. Communication, how do we communicate? Who, when, how? Agree these boundaries, agree these parameters. So, for example, 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening, it might not be appropriate for a parent to be phoning a coach at that time just because that time fits with a parent. But if you haven't outlined that parent might not be aware that that's not an appropriate time because it works for them. They may not know it doesn't work for you. But you could have any inquiries, any non-urgent inquiries can be a Sunday afternoon, for example, between 2 and 6. You could, as I mentioned, you can agree those the communication lines and those parameters around those communication. You can also agree who is appropriate to speak to. So are there specific coaches within the club or specific roles within the club that are the appropriate people to raise certain concerns, issues or questions to? And when and how, what's the appropriate communication format? Is it email? Is it a telephone call? Is it a text message? Again, you as a club, as a coach, should be the people agreeing these parameters and boundaries. And do you have a list of roles that parents can play at the club? So could they be a club photographer at the events? Could they be a social coordinator? Could they be a team fundraiser? And if you have a list of roles that parents can play, again, this can encourage really positive engagement. Again, just moving forwards, what are the logistics? So when do you allow people to know what competitions you're going to, what races you're going to, what's the notice period on that? Will athletes know the whole season plan? Do they know what the training structures look like? What are your expectations around timekeeping, turning up to training? If athletes are going to be late, what do you expect in terms of them letting you know? Is their WhatsApp okay, or should they give you a call? Again, talk through some of the logistics. What's the club or indeed the coach's policy around athlete development? Is it about fun and enjoyment, or are you taking this super seriously and actually it's all about winning? We would absolutely hope that it's more around fun and enjoyment and a lifelong enjoyment of sport. We mentioned this earlier, what is your dealing with disagreement policy? What is your cooling off period? Do you have a 24-hour or 48-hour policy in terms of post-competition or post-selection? What are the goals for the season? Are there specific events or races that you're targeting? Is the goal around an athlete PB for the season? Again, you could talk this through. What's the goal of the club? Is it to increase participation? Is it to have more of an impact on the local community? Again, great topics and items to include in an agenda and an induction at the beginning of the season. One of the things that we do get feedback on from athletes is how off-putting it is when parents are yelling instructions on the side, and those instructions are often different from what the coach is going through with them. So one of the ideas that we've seen work elsewhere is actually switching the roles and asking parents to compete. And so as a club or as a coach, if you have the opportunity, you can do a swap day or a swap training session where the parents wear the sports kit and do some training, and the children are the spectators and get to yell the instructions from the sidelines. And again, this is a really good way to demonstrate to parents how it feels when you're being yelled different instructions from the sideline as to what your coach has asked you to do. So there's some great tips and strategies and tactics out there in terms of engaging with parents, and that one's quite a good one, especially if you have tricky parents. So just a quick summary. To go through a summary of the session. As coaches, as clubs, identify what you're already doing really well. I'm sure there will be so many of these points that you're already embracing within your own environment. So make sure that you celebrate what you're already doing really well. We would ask you to absolutely embrace parents. As parents, we would ask you to have realistic expectations of the coaches. Talk to them about what these expectations are. What can you do more of in your environments as a coach, or what could you add to your environment? Build a culture, set the tone and the rules of engagement. You can discuss these at the annual induction and indeed have them readily available through the club website or through your newsletters. Set these policies out early, and it's much easier to reinforce or revisit what these preferred behaviours and preferred processes are. Use positive language and positive messages throughout all of your communications content and any branding or imagery you have around your environments as well. If you haven't used them previously, put together some informative infographics for the parents. They'll find these resources really useful. And again, it's encouraging that engagement and showing that you are positively engaging with different groups who are linked to your club. And think about including some alternative awards at your awards evening. Most clubs, most coaches are involved in awards evenings at their clubs. So celebrate some of the traits that are wider than winning. Fair play award, positive attitude, most supportive parent or family. And just some further information is available through the CPSU, the Child Protection and Sport Unit, which is part of the NSPCC. So absolutely jump onto the CPSU website there, and there's numerous resources available there as well. And that is us in a nutshell. That is some hints and tips and strategies to encourage coach and parent engagement. My colleague Sarah is going to facilitate some questions, so if you do have any, please do type away in the questions function. And Sarah, I'm going to ask you to jump in there, and if there's any questions that have come through already, could you please let me know?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Really insightful webinar there. It was really good. Yeah, we've had some great questions coming in. So one of the questions we've had is, how can you get coaches and parents to communicate more effectively for the benefit of an athlete?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, good question. Well thought through. I'd say probably one of the biggest things that I try and encourage is communication. So actually having a conversation between all three parties there, so the coach, the parent and the athlete, and agree some parameters and boundaries. So what themes or topics should be communicated and when and by whom and by what method. Which themes or topics would the athlete prefer you to discuss coach to parent? Which themes or topics would the athlete prefer the coach to discuss directly with them? And then the athlete can then relay those messages. I think having those regular communication, those regular conversations to touch base and to agree those parameters is probably one of the best things you can do in order to communicate more effectively for the benefit of the athlete. The athlete is at the heart of this. You know, we want to be person-centered, so let's bring them into this and ask them how the three different parties there can communicate effectively, and which themes and topics should they be communicating about and when.
Yeah. Wonderful. And then another question that's just come through is, what are the advantages to a club working with its parent audience?
Oh, I think there's several. I think there's so many advantages of clubs engaging more with parents. It's a better environment for everyone. There's clear guidelines and processes and not rules, but boundaries and parameters in place, so everybody knows where they stand. There's also potential volunteer recruitment pool there. We talked about, you know, engaging with parents and having some roles that are specifically for parents that you can bring them in and get them involved in different aspects of the club. And actually, it could potentially lead to greater retention of athletes. If an athlete is in an environment where they feel like they're thriving, they're more likely to stay there for longer as well. So I think there's numerous advantages of clubs working with its parents' audience.
Yeah, brilliant. And then just one other's come through, which is a really lovely one. How can clubs ensure athlete experience is at the centre of the club's development strategy?
Great question. I come from a performance lifestyle background. That's my role in Sport Wales. Athlete experience is at the heart of everything that I do. I think the fact whoever asked that question seems to be very person-centered, and that's what we all have to remember. We don't work with athletes. We don't support athletes. We support people who are athletes. It's just part of what they do. It's not who they are. So a couple of different options in terms of clubs ensuring athlete experience, is that right? Is at the centre of club development strategy.
Yeah.
Have an athlete rep on the committee. There's one example. That way you're getting an athlete voice at the heart of everything you do. And that could be a formal position, or it could just be that the athlete is brought into committee meetings to represent the athlete population at the club. Involve athletes in decision making and policy development. Ask for feedback on a regular basis. You could have an annual survey or a more regular survey that's specifically for the athletes in your club, and likewise you could have a separate survey for parents and other audiences in the club. Ask them for ideas and suggestions, and go to your athletes and ask them for ideas and suggestions that they feel the club could implement in order to make them feel that the athlete is at the centre of the club development.
Yeah, and the athletes feel that they have a voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful.
Any other questions?
No, there's no other questions coming through, just some really lovely comments about saying how, you know, great the webinar was and how like really useful, just some, you know, practical tips that you provided. And also someone was saying how much they loved all the infographics. They thought that they were great, you know, to use and to refer to. So no, I haven't got any more questions, but just some loads of thanks just to say, you know, that it was a great webinar, really insightful.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you once again to everybody for giving up some of their time on a very warm summer's evening. I do hope that people have been able to get some takeaways from it. And I understand that the slides and the webinar, well, the webinar's been recorded, so the resource will be available on the Welsh Athletics website in the next few days, so people will be able to go back and have another look through it or have a look at the resources that I've shown as well. But thank you very much for everybody coming along this evening, and we very much appreciate your time and your participation.